السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وبعد. Welcome to our 7-episode series of Towards a Modern Awakening. Today is episode number 2. I'll be talking about intellect and thought. Malik bin Nabi said once in his famous book, The Conditions for an Awakening, he said, a nation is valued not by the amount of possessions that they own, but by the amount of thoughts that they have. Intellect and thought has been so intriguing to the human race that the known philosopher Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. A civilization really is nothing but a physical and moral manifestation of the collective thoughts of any given society. And because of the importance of it, I almost wanted to start this series by talking about intellect and thought before leadership, but then I made the decision to start with leadership. I thought it was more appropriate. When you look at the Quran and the Sunnah, you find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at this topic in a very interesting way. The first words that were revealed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, the first words that Jibreel ever said to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam were Iqra. Iqra, in Arabic what it means to read, not written text, but to read in the figurative meaning. To read everything, to read your life, to read life around you, to read history, to read nature, to read circumstances and situation, to read incidents, to read in between the lines. Iqra means to gather knowledge, to benefit from the experiences of the people before you. That's the meaning, that's the actual meaning of the word Iqra in the Arabic language. And if you continue the first 5 verses that were revealed to the Prophet ﷺ, you find they're filled with knowledge. They're talking about obtaining knowledge and giving Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq khalaqal insana min alaq. Iqra, again, read. Wa rabbukal akram. This verse is very intriguing. Read, just read, and your Lord is the most generous. Just read and you'll see His generosity. علم الذي علم بالقلم. He taught with the pen. علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. He taught the human being that which he did not know. You can see he's just filled with the concept of knowledge. If you go through the Quran, you find time and time again, he talks subhanahu wa ta'ala about his creation. He talks about different incidents and examples. And at the end of them, he says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَفَكَّرُونَ, so that you may think or engage in deep thought process. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, so that you may understand and comprehend. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ تَذَكَّرُونَ, all have the same idea of comprehension, of proper understanding. There are verses in Surah Fatir where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about His creation. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فَأَخْرَجْنَا بِهِ ثَمَرَاتٍ مُخْتَلِفًا أَلْوَانُهَا وَمِنَ الْجِبَالِ جُدَدٌ بِيضٌ وَحُمْرٌ مُخْتَلِفٌ أَلْوَانُهَا وَغَرَابِيبُ سُودٌ وَمِنَ النَّاسِ وَالدَّوَابِّ وَالْأَنْعَامِ مُخْتَلِفٌ أَلْوَانُهُ كَذَلِكَ. He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, do you not see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings down rain from the sky, and then different types of plants come from the earth of different species and different colors and different fruits. And then when you look at the mountains, you'll see rock and soil that have different colors. Some of it is black, some of it is red, some of it is brown. And then from the human race itself and all other living creatures, there are different species and different races and different colors and different appearances. And then at the end of all that, he's showing with the variety and diversity of what He created. He says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. Indeed, the ones who actually revere Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the scholars. If you look at the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and when he talks about the importance of seeking knowledge, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ, for you to seek knowledge that is obligatory upon you as a Muslim. He says alayhi salatu wasalam, أُطْلُبُ الْعِلْمَ وَلَوْ فِي الصِّينِ أُطْلُبُ الْعِلْمَ مِنَ الْمَهْدِ إِلَى اللَّحْدِ. Make sure that you seek knowledge all your life. مَنْ سَلَكَ طَرِيقًا يَلْتَمِسُ فِيهِ عِلْمًا سَهَّلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ بِهِ طَرِيقًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. He who walks on a path where he is seeking knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ease for them a path to Jannah. Alayhi salatu wasalam would say, لِيَلِنِي مِنْكُمْ فِي الصَّلَاةِ أُولُو النُّهَى. May the people be standing right behind me in prayer, the thinkers of the society, those who engage in deep thought. Many of the Sahaba would say similar things. تَفَكُّرُ سَاعَةٍ خَيْرٌ مِّن قِيَامِ لَيْلَةٍ. For you to spend an hour where you're engaging in deep thought is better than praying all night long. Once Imam al-Shafi'i visited Imam Malik, and the daughter of Imam Malik watched Imam al-Shafi'i all night, and she didn't see him pray all night. Her father would pray much more. So she went to her father and said, it's very weird. This is a great Imam, and I looked at him. He didn't pray that much overnight. So they went and asked him, what do you do all night? He said, I was spending time thinking about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ with Al-Nughayr, Abu Umayr and Al-Nughayr. This is a known hadith where the Prophet ﷺ played with a small child whose bird had died. So Imam Malik said, what you spent all night doing was better than what I spent all night doing. The legacy of the Prophet ﷺ. What is the true legacy of the Prophet ﷺ? He didn't leave tall buildings, high buildings ﷺ. He didn't leave railroads. And what he left ﷺ was a legacy of thought. He left a thought process. He left an idea. His idea was strong, alayhi salatu wasalam, and that's why it conquered the world at the time. You see, the Muslims did not outnumber the civilizations that surrounded them. They didn't have more wealth. They didn't have natural resources in their land, but what they did have was a strong idea that was superior to all the other thoughts and intellectual ideas that existed in the land at the time. And so all the civilizations around them crumbled in front of this superior idea that they had. That's why following the Prophet ﷺ, before we follow him in how he dressed and how we should follow him intellectually. We should learn to think the way he thought, alayhi salatu wasalam. To spend time studying how did he view the world, what perspectives did he have, how did he view the other races and other people and other civilizations and non-Muslims, how did he view the environment around him, how did he view his family, how did he view acts of worship and rituals, how did he view peace and war, how did he view these things, what was his thought process, alayhi salatu wasalam? Much more important. You see, there's a nice comparison between Ibrahim alayhi salam and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam regarding idols. You see, Ibrahim tried to destroy idols before he was able to actually teach his people. He destroyed the idols, but it didn't do anything. They outcasted him from his country, and they went back and they built other idols and they worshipped. And they worshipped them, didn't make a difference. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam changed the thought process. He changed mindsets, alayhi salatu wasalam, perspectives. He taught people and he enlightened them and he raised awareness. And on the day of Fatih Makkah, if you go and study many of the narrations of that day, that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, when he walked into Mecca in front of the Kaaba, where all the idols were still there, all 360 or so of them, he had a stick and he would point at these asnam and they would just fall down, and the Sahaba witnessed this. Because it's not about destroying the idol, it's destroying the idol mindset, the idol thought process. If you can do that, the idols will fall on their own. We need to change the way we think. What's our problem today? Today we have an issue, we have a crisis of our Islamic narratives, of al-khitab al-Islami. Unfortunately, our narratives aren't meeting the needs of our societies and communities and our youth specifically. We're not offering the solutions that people are looking for. We're not offering the answers that make sense to them. And this is mainly the reason that so many of our Muslim youth are shying away from Islam and don't take it as seriously as we would like them to, and aren't as interested. And that's why I talked yesterday so much about Jumu'ah. Because Jumu'ah is not only is it an installed system for leadership, it's an installed system to make sure that knowledge transmission continues. Imagine that every single week, hundreds of millions of Muslims come to masajid so they can learn, so they can be taught something new, so that their way of thought can be redirected and you would think that it's beyond me how we messed that up. Wallahi, it's beyond me as Muslims how we were able to mess up the system of Jumu'ah that was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took care of bringing people. Just make sure you educate them properly. Just make sure you direct knowledge in a way that is beneficial. We have a problem of comprehension, of understanding, of al-fahm. We have a problem of understanding Islam, of fahm ad-deen. Al-fahm is a very big issue that we have today. Failing to see Islam as a universal way of life that covers every aspect of our existence. Being able to see Islam as wasati, as a moderate religion. Being able to view Islam as a wide river rather than a circus high rope. Or an endless and infinite open landscape where anything is acceptable. Understanding that Islam has more, that there are aspects of Islam that allow it to exist in a way where there are difference of opinion within it. Understanding Islam in a way that is positive, that is realistic, that will help build, that will help Muslims become productive, rather than seeing Islam in a negative way. Having a mindset where we're waiting for things to happen, where we are depending on mystic changes to occur in order for us to see change in our own lives. Being able to identify fasl al-khitab, the decisive articles of faith, the things that are undebatable, that are unnegotiable, that are undisputed within Islam, and being able to see ma yasughu fihi al-ikhtilaf, what difference of opinion, where difference of opinion actually is encouraged within Islam. That brings rahmah and it allows people to find different options and alternatives when things are difficult for them. Seeing the difference between al-muhkam, between the absolutely clear articles of faith, and the mutashabih, the allegorical, where there's different ways to understand it, and understanding that that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed Islam. He designed it to function that way, for there to be issues that are undeniable and undebatable, and for there to be parts of Islam that are. That there are thawabit and mutaghayyirat, that there are constant aspects of our faith, and that there are variables as well. Being able to see the priorities in Islam, that not every single command in Islam is equal to the next. That commands in Islam and obligatory actions, they have rankings. They're not all equal. Not everything he did and said, alayhi salatu wasalam, is equal. Some are more important than others. And being able to appreciate that in Islam is an issue of intellect, of thought, of how we view things, our perspectives. Doing all that by following evidence and proof. You see, that's how Islam works. Islam is a religion that depends fully on evidence and proof. What you can prove, what evidence you have, what arguments you have. The Quran goes to the extent of saying, قُلْ إِن كَانَ لِلرَّحْمَنِ وَلَدٍ فَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْعَابِدِينَ. Say, if you can prove that Allah, that the most merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a child, has a son, then I'll be the first one to worship him. Just prove it. قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Bring your evidence if you are truthful, if you actually have an argument. And they're saying that that's how Islam has always worked and always functioned. And that is why Islam will never, ever have a problem with modern science. There is never going to be, there never was, isn't today, and never will be any contradiction between modern science and Islam. Why? Because it's the same source. They come from the same source. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to His Prophet, and this is studying what He created subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's impossible for them to contradict. That's why if you disagree with the Big Bang Theory, or you disagree with evolution, disagree with them from a scientific perspective, because you look at the science and the science isn't sound, not because you're a Muslim and you feel that it contradicts your faith and the understanding of your religion. It's not the same thing. It's okay to disagree with scientific topics and articles, but don't disagree with them because you think Islam forces you to, because it doesn't. It never will, and that's so important. Again, this is an issue of the way we think, the way we understand our deen. And it's sad sometimes to see that that's not the case. What we need today is intellectual iman, al-iman al-dhaki, smart faith. We have smartphones, we have smart screens, we have smart everything. We need smart faith and smart belief, intellectual faith, based on evidence, based on rationale, based on logic, based on being able to argue a concept through the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through Quran and Sunnah, and through the rationale and the logic of the world that we live in. This is what we're missing. When you look at the Quran did not frown upon anything as much as it frowned upon ignorance. إِنَّ شَرَّ الدَّوَابِّ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الصُّمُّ الْبُكْمُ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ. The worst of His creation, subhanahu wa ta'ala, are the ones who can't seem to hear or see or understand anything. They're not using their abilities. The more you go through the Quran, you find that يَجْهَلُونَ الْجَاهِلِينَ is something that is looked on as the worst thing possible, to the point where the period right before Islam was called Jahiliyyah, a time of ignorance. You see, no matter what you mix with ignorance, the outcome is going to be negative, specifically when you mix religion with ignorance. And we've been seeing the outcome for the last many decades. And we're still living with the outcomes and with the consequences of having a religion, of trying to follow Islam, but doing it with an ignorant mindset. And Islam is so against us being ignorant and not being well informed and not having the right way of looking at things and not following evidence and not following proof and not following logic. We have to spend time understanding that our deen is extremely embedded and extremely associated and affiliated with the scientific method of thought, with an intelligent approach to how we look at the rulings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the verses of the Quran. We need to learn how to debate, how to argue issues, how to talk about topics that we disagree upon. We have to change the way we think so that we can learn how to disagree. We don't seem to know how to disagree. We have an issue with that. We've had issues with that for the last 300 years, if not more. Ever since the Khilafah fell, we've taken so many steps backward that we don't know how to disagree with one another anymore. When you go and you study the history of the scholars of Islam, you will find that the great scholars, they differed on some very serious issues. Yet they never stopped respecting one another. That they never stopped seeing the massive amount of common ground that brought them together and allowed them to continue to work together and allowed them to collectively work towards the awakening and the rising of their ummah. And today we have to be able to learn to do that again. We have to start talking a bit more. See, this is something that we're struggling with. We don't engage in proper dialogue about our own deen. People have questions and they have concerns and they have arguments. They want to bring it forward. You can't answer people's problems with a one sentence no or yes. You undermine their intelligence, and that's not how Islam has worked in the past. And we have to change that. And this is a matter of how we think, really. It's just a matter of how we look at life itself. There are many obstacles that stand in front of intellect and thought, which I think is probably the biggest problem that we have as Muslims today. Our struggle today is not a struggle of wealth. It's not a struggle of numbers. It's not a struggle of physical or military strength. It's not even a struggle of politics, really. It's a struggle of thought, of intellect, of understanding Islam. Again, this is where the face-off is actually going to happen. You want to get rid of extremism? Well, there are two ways you can do it. You can go by violently and try to take them all out, or you can do it through proving that their thought process is completely wrong and flawed, and that the alternative is much better. And that's how you'll actually achieve it. We know now when you try to take force to it, it's not going to fix the problem. More people will just keep on joining because we haven't beaten the thought. The stronger thought must win, always does. The Prophet ﷺ never stood down from a debate or a dialogue or an argument, ever. He asked the Quraysh, come talk to me. Tell me what your problems are. Tell me what your intellectual challenges are. Let me hear it. Let us talk. And they didn't want to because they had the weaker thought. They had the weaker idea, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't. He had the stronger idea, and he wanted to bring it forward. And if we as Muslims have the stronger idea, which we do, then we have to welcome everyone saying what they want to say. And we will through the logic of Islam and through the logic of the Quran and Sunnah, be able to break those down. And if we're not willing to do that, the problem must be that we're not confident about our own thought process and about our own deen, which I think is a problem. The first obstacle I believe that stands in front of proper intellect and thought in our deen is khurafa and khuzabalat, is superstition. Look at Muslim communities around the world. Look at your own household. I know that I have. We have so much superstition that exists within it. We talk so much about jinn and ayn and sihr and hasad and all these. We're so superstitious, and we engage in activities that sometimes are embarrassing because that's what happens when an ummah, when a nation loses its way. When an ummah or a nation loses its ability to think rationally and logically, they engage in superstition. Just study history. And we have so much of it in our Muslim world that you think that jinn only exists in the Middle East or in these areas. They don't exist anywhere else. And the problem is because this is an obstacle that we have put in front of ourselves. Instead of being societies that follow evidence, that follow proof, that follow science, the way Islam teaches us to through the Quran, we're filled with superstition, and that's something we have to get rid of. It's harming our own youth. It's harming Muslims. It's harming people with mental health issues. It really is. And if you have someone who struggles with mental health in your house, you know that for a fact. The second issue that I think stands in front of intellect and thought is ta'assub, is bigotry. When we belong to a certain school of thought. You see, the traditional Muslim Islamic schools of thought, one way or the other, have not been able in the last decade to answer a lot of the questions and bring forward solutions for Muslims in situations that don't have precedence. And for us to continue to belong to these schools of thought, blindly, not accepting in any way or form, leaving them or changing or looking or thinking outside of the box, or is a problem. Ta'assub bigotry has never brought khair ever. We're not even supposed to be muta'assibeen. We shouldn't even belong blindly to Islam itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never commanded the Prophet ﷺ to be muta'assib for Islam. He told him, fastamsik, hold on tight. But you do it through logic and through rationale and through evidence. Even when it comes to your own belief, that's what you do. Ta'assub is a problem today. Whether it's towards your school of thought or towards you're defending your sheikh or defending the imam that you really respect and love, which is not a problem. You should do, but when you do it blindly to the point where you can't see the light and the argument of the person in front of you, is a problem. Bigotry never brings khair. The third issue that I think is standing between us and our ability to have an intellectual awakening is something called al-inghilaq al-fikri. When we're closed-minded. When we're closed-minded towards everything that is new. When we're closed-minded to arguments and thoughts that are new to us, that we haven't heard before. And we dismiss them quickly. And we deal with them through fear. We deal with ideas that are new with fear instead of dealing with them with evidence and rationale. It's not the same thing. We have to keep an open mind. The Prophet ﷺ, that's how he lived his life. He was extremely open-minded. What he brought to Quraysh, to them, was completely new. And only the people of Quraysh who were open-minded were able to actually consider what he was teaching, alayhi salatu wasalam, at the time. Alayhi salatu wasalam, people would bring him pieces of advice and thoughts that were completely outside of the realm of what was normal to him. When you think about it, they dug a trench, 5-kilometer long trench. No one had done that in Arabia before. But it was a thought that came from Persia by Salman al-Farisi. And the Prophet ﷺ had no problem thinking about that and actually doing it himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and it worked. Closed-mindedness and being short-sighted is a problem. We have to learn to open up our minds a bit and open up our horizons so we can actually benefit from the depth and the beauty of the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The fourth issue that I think stands between us and our ability to intellectually grow is al-aba'iyya, is holifying traditions and culture. Is when we are so stuck to what we were raised to do, or what the norm was in whatever part of the country or part of the world we grew up in, where our tradition and culture takes precedence and is one level higher than looking at the evidence and the rationale properly. You see, this is what the Quran talks about in a negative way time and time again. Looks at the people who refuse the Prophet ﷺ's da'wah and tells them, why you keep on saying آباؤنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعلمون شيئا ولا يهتدون أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعقلون شيئا ولا يهتدون. They keep on saying, our forefathers never said this, our forefathers never did this. Well, what if their forefathers didn't know as much as they think they knew? Maybe it should be based on the norm and what you're used to and what you're accustomed to. Maybe we should have a bit more flexibility within our souls and spirits and our minds so that we can actually look at situations that are different, that are new, that are challenging, and not immediately go back to what is safe to us, which is what we were raised upon. raised on. Of course, fear is a big problem. We fear that we don't want to change the deen. We don't want to do something that is different. But you can't grow if that's the mindset. We cannot grow as Muslims if we don't do that. We need to remember at the end that al-afkar tahkum al-suluk. Thoughts dictate behavior. Ideas, the way we think, will dictate the way we behave. If we are going to change and become better, we have to change the way we think. We have to start thinking differently. We have to start wondering, how did he think, alayhi salatu wasalam, throughout his life? How am I supposed to understand Islam? What is we have to start looking at it like that in order for us to actually change. As I said yesterday, at the end of every episode, I want to put forward an action plan. The point of these 7 episodes in this series is not for me just to rant about things that bother me. The point of this series is to put forward an action plan. We have time this Ramadan. As you can see, the masjid is empty, unfortunately. We're all staying home. Those who go to work are going for less hours, and not every day. We're spending more time at home. It's giving us more time to reflect. We have to figure out some radical changes that we need to make in ourselves after this is all over. This may be a chance that an opportunity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us. This may be what this is. He's giving us a chance to revisit and reconsider a lot of the positions we're taking, a lot of reconsider our ways in general. The action plan for today is we must learn. You must take upon yourself the actual responsibility and duty to learn Islam, to learn it properly, to question everything that you're told. If I sit anywhere and I talk about Islam, and I try to teach the concepts of Islam, I try to teach the way of thought, and I am not questioned, and I am not kept in check, then I will start saying things that are incorrect, and I'll get lazy. And I'll start, unfortunately, because that's how human beings are. We need to question everything we hear. And if the answer that you're getting doesn't make sense, you need to ask again and again until the answer makes sense or the answer changes to something that does make sense. Because it's not just about, is it halal or haram? Halal, it's not about halal. That's not how Islam works. Islam requires us all to be engaged in understanding evidence, understanding how it actually functions. We can't afford as Muslims to be ignorant about our own faith and not know how Islam. You can't afford to do that. Everyone has to ask, and everyone has to learn. Everyone has to increase their awareness and their amount of knowledge that they have regarding Islam. This has to be a critical part of our lives. Never were we ever asked as Muslims to follow blindly, ever. I said that yesterday in leadership and fellowship. I'm saying again today regarding knowledge. You're never asked to follow blindly and to listen to what someone is saying without taking time to process it, to perform critical thinking regarding what you are listening to, and to ask questions and to engage in conversations. We have to learn to talk and debate and have dialogue and converse and disagree. We should have done this yesterday. We are so late in doing this right now. And this is not something new. This is going back to how he taught, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is how Islam evolved. This is how Islam came forward. He taught the Sahaba to do that, to ask questions, to object when it didn't make sense to them. He taught them how to think. And that's why the Sahaba were transformed as human beings. Study their lives before Islam and study what they became later. A good example, take Umar ibn al-Khattab. Someone who had a crisp mindset, a crisp brain, very intelligent. Look how he lived before Islam, and then look towards the end of his life. The transformation is unimaginable because the Prophet ﷺ taught him how to think, which is what we're missing today. I need you, after all this is done, to take it seriously and to engage in academic and non-academic knowledge seeking, to raise awareness within yourself about how Islam works, and to raise awareness about Islam in the community surrounding us. We can't afford to be ignorant about Islam. We can't afford to be ignorant about anything anymore. Ignorance is the number one enemy within Islam. The number one enemy in Islam is ignorance, because it's the biggest problem that stands in front of intellectual growth and improving our thought processes and understanding Islam in a way that allows Islam to function within communities properly, that allows Islam to bring forward a narrative that your son and daughter at school can be proud of, that can bring forward answers to difficult questions that bring calmness of mind and heart, peace of mind and heart, to bring forward solutions that actually allow societies to overcome their difficulties and overcome their problems. That is what I hope the action plan from this episode will be. I hope you find that beneficial. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, we will see you again tomorrow at 5:30 and for khutbah Jum'ah prior to that at 2:30 inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.